Good day. I am Gerard Lico from the University of the Philippines, and today I'm going to talk about the epidemic diseases and the rise of modern architecture in the Philippines. The colonization of the Philippine archipelago by the United States commenced at the turn of the 20th century. Infrastructure projects became an essential ingredient of America's modernization program, expanding imperial control throughout the colony. In the process of territorial takeover, Manila, as a new American colonial city, would undergo massive urban and architectural transformation to restructure Manila's urban built environment as a model colonial outpost, endowed with modernity. The American authorities generously deployed its resources and technological know-how to improve existing infrastructure and introduce urban strategies that assured a comfortable, healthy, and secure settlement for the anticipated influx of American population. Charged with imperialist agenda, this urban overhaul was initiated not only to facilitate efficient colonial governance and to signify the power of the new colonial order, but also to demonstrate the modernist tendencies of the regime, which is a stark contrast to the backwardness of the previous Spanish colonization. The initial years of American occupation was beleaguered by a succession of epidemic diseases, from bubonic plague to cholera. These were all attributed to the unhygienic domestic practices of the Filipinos at that time. Building ordinances were issued to prevent the outbreak and spread of diseases. In the context of Manila's epidemic-stricken urban terrain, allegedly filthy native costumes, habits, and spatial practices were singled out as the cause of the proliferation of various tropical diseases which threatened the equilibrium of the hygienic colonial order. A sweeping modernizing urban program was designed, conscripting the expertise of imperial physicians, sanitarians, urban planners, architects, engineers, with disciplinary strategies to cure the unhealthy colonial environment by excising its dangerous and disorderly elements and thereby reforming the unwholesome native spatial practices. American colonial urbanism crafted the geometry of spatial regulation, instilling disciplinary technologies by controlling social behaviors through indirect imposition. These are encrypted in spatial and architectural forms, which are made invisible. The American method of colonial hygienic surveillance maneuvered in a Foucauldian disciplinary logic. Such policies were highly meticulous and almost militaristic. Sanitary squad, for instance, moved through the city, street by street, quarter by quarter, house by house, accounting the daily census of the living and dead, arresting suspected and infected native bodies for quarantine, the cleansing or burning of contaminated native houses, and the removal and disposal of the dead by cremation. These parallels what we experience in the COVID-19 pandemic. This moment of sanitary warfare, however, coincided with the American campaign to win the Philippine-American War. Such intersection made the acts of war and the acts of medical surveillance indistinguishable from each other. However, Filipinos resisted both. The campaign against plague infection and the cholera outbreak represented the severity of American colonial therapeutics. But on a larger urban scale, the spatial consequence of the bubonic plague was urban vigilance, campaign against rodents, strict maritime quarantine, and rat-proof architecture, all codified in the new building code. On the other hand, the cholera epidemic was an impetus to subdivision development in the form of new relocation sites, appropriately called sanitary barrios, coupled with modern pipe water systems, underground networks of sewage conduits, and medicalized domestic architectural prototype called sanitary model house. Epidemics in Manila, therefore, ushered in the installation of infrastructural systems of colonial modernity. These are the invisible aspect of the city. The knowledge of disease etiology generated from the experience of urban epidemic resulted in the legislation of a colonial building code known as Ordinance Number 78, whose provision were embedded with medico-sanitary prescription to assure the compliance with healthy safety standards of future construction in the Philippines. This would forever alter the building practices and the way Filipino build, which are geared towards modern and sound construction. Premises infested with rats were declared as menace to public safety and required owners to make some alteration. These were codified in the Municipal Order Number 5, an ordinance relating to buildings and premises infected with bubonic plague, enacted on December 1901. If the owner of the house failed to adopt the prescribed rat-proofing methods, their house would be immediately demolished or set ablaze. The many instances of house burning ignited the hatred of the natives, especially the poor who suffered the most. When Manila was threatened by cholera in 1902 to 1904, the American doctors and sanitarians crusaded against the disease with medico-sanitary intervention that placed much emphasis on both regulation of the physical space and the control of individual spatial practice. In the period's widely believed miasmic theory of disease, the person's excrement is considered highly infectious and must be disposed properly. So, miasmic theory disease is a theory in which diseases originate from putrefying or decaying matter. The cholera outbreak instigated excremental politics and the biopolitical obsession of the colonial doctors and sanitarians to regulate and control the Filipino practice of defecation, whom the Filipinos were considered as promiscuous defecators. A whole range of infrastructure devoted to the natives' excremental practices would emerge in the cityscape, in addition to the general cleaning of the physical environment. The architecture of the native dwelling was radically overhauled by the municipal and health authorities, who ordered the installation of latrines and other domestic services. So some received structural modification on the internal features of the native huts. The use of toilet was introduced in 1902. This was during the height of the cholera epidemic among the communities of thatch houses in Manila. And this was known as the pail system or cubeta system. In the absence of metropolitan sewer lines, the system provided each household with wooden buckets which were collected daily by municipal excrement wagon. Public toilets were built in congested Nipa district. The toilet in this discourse becomes a domestic apparatus of modernity, and the Americans were so fascinated. They were fixated in innovating the Filipino toilet throughout their tenure. The authorities also banned the use of canals for bathing and washing and established a new type of communal architecture that combined the function of toilet, bath, and laundry. The first of this kind, which combined bath, laundry in one-story structure, was made of concrete. This was built in 1913 in Manila. The burning of houses, such as the cholera-infected district of Parola, in March 1902, accomplished threefold agenda. First, for disinfection of the urban space in order to contain the possible spread of pathogen from the house of infectives to the neighboring district, and for the instant erasure of decrepit architecture of the poor natives, which taints the imperial metropolitan imaginary with an appalling urban squalor. The cleansing or clearance of the site rendered the urban space ready for regeneration. Imperial embellishment and hegemonic social control of the unruly, diseased bodies of the modern metropolis. As a form of compromise, the pathogenic neighborhoods slowly gave way to the sanitary barrios, where a new domestic prototype, which is a hybridized form of a native house known as sanitary model house, invented in 1917, was mass manufactured for the plebeian class. The building of these model houses and these communities marked a shift in the American urban policy, which recast their image from a ruthless demolisher or arsonist of indigenous neighborhood to an altruistic community developer, and moreover, they have become an agents of modernity. The Americans introduced in 1908 the neighborhood concept known as sanitary barrios, which permitted nipa houses or thatch roofed houses to be built on a highly regulated blocks of subdivided lots to control overcrowding, filth, bad ventilation, and urban fires. Each sanitary block had a built-in system of surface drainage, public latrine, public bathhouses and laundry, and public water hydrants. And this could all be availed free of charge to all residents. With the success of the sanitary barrios, the American authorities focused their efforts to modernize the extant Filipino house. Vernacular dwellings, its materiality, layout, construction, and services posed a myriad of health issues. The colonial architects and sanitary engineers successfully evolved a new kind of domestic architecture, the chalet. This parallels what the British did for the Indian bungalow. In 1912, the Bureau of Health drew up plans for sanitary dwellings or habitation, reiterating this chalet prototype. These plans were disseminated to the public via Health Bulletin number 10 known as Philippine habitation. Schemes were drawn for the general types of urban house: single detached, semi-detached or duplex, and row house apartments, known as accessoria. When sites were cleared of potential pathogens, and imperial placemaking soon followed. The urban makeover germinated from the philosophy of the city beautiful planning, whose fundamental basis professed that physical beautification of the city and the dispensation of urban aesthetics would breathe new life to Manila's presumed diseased urban condition. And this would bring instant social recuperation as well. Behind the facade, the imperial iconography and colonial modernity that the Burnham Plan. This plan was designed by the foremost Mozart American architect Daniel H. Burnham in 1905. This master plan for Manila sought to erect in Manila an urban cure conceived in the language of geometry, function, hierarchy, and pathology, and was driven to regularize the colonial space and facilitate the orderly arrangement of native bodies within that space. The cleared sites of pathology provided an empty space ready for the erection of ceremonial straight avenues, right angles, and functional zoning. These were so prescribed to render the space available for imperial placemaking. In the pursuit of colonial modernity and scientific progress, it was necessary to install and overlay the City Beautiful Master Plan with technological systems. This take the form of pipe water system, sewage lines, electricity, transportation network, and other public infrastructure. These technology were not merely a material element in the production of the urban image of a rapidly advancing American imperial city, but it also constituted a critical dimension to the social production of space, implying connectivities between the native body and the city, between the social and biophysical systems, and between the invisible and the visible aspects of the urban space. It was at this juncture that urbanism and architecture replaced physical force and coercive strategies with rituals of civility and governmentality. This was to solicit native obedience to the invisible colonial state. In this way, we can see that the styling of architecture paralleled the styling of native disciplines. Steel frame skeleton construction, reinforced concrete, and concrete hollow blocks were the primary construction technologies imported from the United States, widely employed in the infrastructural development of the colony. Burnham recommended the use of reinforced concrete as a primary building material. The colonial sanitarians also prescribed the use of concrete for domestic architecture and public infrastructure. For the implementation of Burnham's 1905 urban directives, Mozart-trained architect William Parsons came into the picture. Parsons served as consulting architect of the Bureau of Public Works. This is the primary agency to deliver the building requirement of the colony. He worked with the Bureau from 1905 to 1914. During his tenure, he was responsible for the design of all public buildings and parks for the entire colony. Under the guidance of the Master Plan of Burnham, neoclassical hybrid monumental structures built of reinforced concrete slowly rose in the landscape. These buildings worked to enhance imperial image, enhanced colonial commerce, and solicited native discipline. Parsons advocated the use of reinforced concrete for all government-funded buildings. For him, apart from the hygienic properties of concrete, it was a plastic material which renders for a smooth surface and a crisp plane, as well as an inexpensive precast relief ornament. Concrete led to mass fabrication and assembly line production. Standardization of plans made possible the continuous production of buildings throughout the archipelago, from prisons to capitals, from hospitals to schools, from clubhouses to train stations. For one, Parsons designed 15 prototypes of schoolhouses for a variety of site condition and adopted reinforced concrete with a vernacular style. Materials, forms, windows, doors, and even blackboards were standardized to bring down cost and maximize construction efficiency. This is a form of assembly line production, which is modern. To conclude, the metropolitan transformation of Manila into a modern colonial city was facilitated by and a product of technoscience, which enabled colonizers to domesticate the disorderly and pathogenic colonial environment in the aftermath of epidemic onslaught. Medical science would control diseases, while novel building materials, building technologies such as ferroconcrete, iron, steel, multi-story structure, prefabrication, and modularization would reshape the built environment and the urban morphology based on a modernizing paradigm that conflates science, medicine, and architecture. Thank you.